Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Before we get started, I wanted to give a huge thanks to our community for 1,000 subscribers. It truly is remarkable how much support I've received from you guys in the past couple of months, and I was absolutely shocked to see a 4-digit subscriber count. I can't thank you guys enough for the support. And I've lacked uploading lately because, I've been working a ton. The weather has been terrible here in Texas due to the spring storms, and I'm about 5 hours from the 250 mark. I've been studying, and I want to share this commercial Checkride prep that I've been going over. I also destroyed my phone, which is what I used to record all my videos, but I'm back with more invaluable content. So today we're going to go over what I used to study for my commercial Checkride, which will be in mid-July. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so let's get started with aeronautical experience required for the commercial certificate. So 61-129 states you need 250 hours of total flight time. 100 hours must be in powered aircraft, 50 of which must be in airplanes. At least 100 hours of pilot in command time. At least 50 hours in airplanes. At least 50 hours cross country, 10 of which must be in airplanes. And at least 10 hours of solo flight time in a single-engine airplane, or 10 hours of flight time performing the duties of PIC with an instructor on board. You're also going to need one cross-country flight of not less than 300 nautical miles of total distance, so over 300 nautical miles, with landings at a minimum of 3 points, one of which in a straight line distance of at least 250 nautical miles. Then you also need 5 hours in night VFR conditions with 10 takeoffs and 10 landings, with each landing involving a flight in a traffic pattern at an airport with an operational control tower. You're also going to need 10 hours of instrument training with a view limiting device or a hood. You need attitude instrument flying, partial panel skills, recovery from unusual flight attitudes, and intercepting and tracking navigational systems. Although most people who get their commercial already have their instrument. But if you don't, just know that you're going to have to know how to do that for your commercial. 1 2-hour cross-country flight in daytime conditions that consist of a total straight line distance of more than 100 nautical miles, and 1 2-hour cross-country flight in nighttime conditions that consists of a total straight line distance of more than 100 nautical miles. So same thing, one at night, one during the day. At least 3 hours in a single engine airplane with an authorized instructor in preparation for the practical test within the preceding 2 calendar months. And 10 hours of training in a complex airplane or a TEA. Now that has to be with an instructor because it is training time. All right, so let's briefly go over the eligibility requirements for the commercial pilot certificate. So 61-123 states you have to be at least 18 years of age, be able to speak, read, write, and understand the English language, receive a logbook endorsement for your written exam. You must score at least a 70 on that, although I suggest you score a little bit higher, and also receive an endorsement for the practical test, which is the Checkride that we call it, and hold at least a private pilot certificate issued under this part, or meet the requirements of 6173 if you're with part 61. If you're with part 141, it's different. And I have been doing quite a bit of flying in a Saratoga, so for that, for time building, you're going to need your complex high performance endorsement, and those can be found in 6131, but I briefly wanted to just talk over that. Now we're going to get into the commercial pilot bread and butter right here. So I'm going to try and go into this as much as I can because I myself want to listen to this later on and hear myself talking about this so I can explain it easier. Okay, so common and private carriage. So you can reference Advisory Circular 120-12A. So what is holding out? So essentially holding out is advertising yourself as a pilot for hire. Okay, so holding out can be done through word of mouth, advertising and signs, or internet and social media. So telling people online, hey, I'm a pilot, pay me, basically, right? So let's also talk about common carriage now. So FAA Advisory Circular 120-12A states, guidelines. A carrier becomes a common carrier when it holds itself out to the public or to the segment of the public as willing to provide transportation within the limits of its facilities to any person who wants it. So that leads me to the 4 elements in defining a common carrier: holding out of a willingness to transport persons or property from place to place or for compensation. This holding out, which makes a person a common carrier, can be done in many ways, and it does not matter how it is done. But defined by the FAA, generally, signs and advertising are the most direct means of holding out to the public, but are not the only ones. Holding out could also be accomplished through agencies, agents, salesmen themselves, or procure passenger traffic from the general public and collect them into groups to be carried by the operator. It is particularly important to determine if people or salesmen are in the business of selling transportation to the traveling public, not only through a group approach, but also individual ticketing on known common carriers. So I'm just going to go over that one more time. So holding out is advertising yourself as a pilot for hire. Holding out can be done through word of mouth, advertising and signs, agents, or internet and social media, either by yourself or by those you know. And common carriage is when a carrier becomes a common carriage carrier when it holds itself out, aka advertises itself to the public as willing to provide transportation to those who want it. So common carriage generally consists of 4 elements: holding out a willingness to transport persons or property from place to place or for compensation. So let's define compensation. So let's briefly describe what the FAA considers compensation. You can reference Advisory Circular 61-142. Compensation is referred to as anything of value, including the sharing of expenses, not to be confused with the 61-113 private pilot rules about your pro rata share, profit or profit motive, so actual exchanging of funds is not required to be considered compensation, and goodwill in the form of expected future economic benefits or accruing flight time. Also, value for a third-party recipient. So you could just take this as basically anything that would get you to do the flight when otherwise you would not can be considered compensation by the FAA if they deem so. Let's go over the Part 91 shared expense rules briefly. So you're allowed to share expenses with passengers so long as those expenses are fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or aircraft rental fees, and you must pay your pro rata share. You must have a common purpose with your passengers and your own reason for flying, meaning you can't just come up with a random reason to bring someone along and consider that a shared expense. And if there is any form of holding out involved, then sharing expenses becomes compensation and now follows under the requirements for common carriage. You can review this in 61-113C. All right, I might make a separate video on all the private carriage, common carriage, holding out, just so that it's easier to understand, but I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible with just the definitions so that then you can apply the knowledge to your given scenario by remembering the core base definition of what I'm talking about. All right, so let's move on to some acronyms you're probably going to have to know for your Checkride. So what are your required personal documents to act as PIC? So you're going to need your pilot certificate, your medical certificate, and an authorized photo ID, as well as a radio operating license or permit if you're flying outside of the US. What are the required aircraft documents? ARO. Airworthiness certificate, registration, radio operating license, again, if you're international, operating limitations and information, so your POH, and your weight and balance data. What are the required aircraft maintenance inspections and how long are they good for, or how long or how often do they have to be checked? AVIATES is the acronym you can remember for that. A stands for annual inspection, which is every 12 calendar months. The VOR is good for every 30 days. 100-hour inspection required if flying for hire. And the altimeter and the transponder, so the A every 12 calendar months for altimeter, and the transponder is also every 24 calendar months. And the ELT every 12 calendar months, and the battery must be replaced after more than 1 hour of cumulative use, or if 50% of the usable battery life is expired. Last but not least, you have the pedostatic system is every 24 calendar months. So if you can remember that the annual is, 12 calendar months, and the altimeter, transponder, and static system all three of those are going to be 24 calendar months. Remember that it is the PIC's responsibility to make sure that all of these documents are up to date and current before a flight is initiated. A couple other things we can go over are the pre-flight self-assessment documents or acronyms. So I'm safe, PAVE, and the DECIDE risk management model. So we have I'm safe, so that's going to be illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, emotion, or eating. Pre-flight general is PAVE, so pilot, aircraft, environment, and external factors. And the DECIDE model is going to be detect, estimate, choose, do, and evaluate the effects of the actions. We can go through those. Detect a change has occurred. Estimate the need to counter the change. Choose what is the desired outcome. Identify the solutions. Do the necessary actions and evaluate the effects of the actions. We can also go through the notorious 91205. 8 tomato flames, minimum required equipment for VFR flight. Remember, every single airplane is actually going to have certain things that you need to have on it that isn't on this list. So make sure that you know what that is for your aircraft. It's not going to be the same for a King Air 250 as it is a Cessna 150. Okay. So we're just going to go over this briefly, but remember that your plane is going to have more than what's on this list, more or less. 8 tomato flames. So altimeter, tachometer, oil temperature gauge, manifold pressure gauge, which obviously is not in a 172, airspeed indicator, temperature gauge for each liquid-cooled engine, oil temperature gauge for each engine, fuel quantity, landing gear position lights, anti-collision lights, magnetic compass, ELT in your seats and seat belts. For minimum required equipment flight for night VFR, it's all 8 tomato flames plus the acronym FLAPS. Fuses, landing light, anti-collision lights, position lights like nav lights, and a source of power like a battery. That also brings me into operating with inoperative equipment. So if the equipment is required by an airworthiness directive, regulations for a type of a specific flight operation, VFR day certification requirements, or an operational equipment list. If so, flying is not permitted without a special flight permit, but if not required by those things stated, flying is permitted so long as the equipment is removed or deactivated and placarded as inoperative, or a pilot/mechanic determines is safe to fly. And if the aircraft has an MEL list or a minimum equipment list, refer to that for your guidance. I personally printed mine out for my Checkride, and I went ahead and highlighted my MEL list in case my examiner says, hey, can we fly without this? Oh, well, I have my MEL list already out and highlighted, and I can tell you right away if we need this or if we don't need this, or if we don't need this, what am I able to do? Well, 91-213 states what I can do with operating with inoperative equipment. So that's where you can find what I just mentioned. 91-213. All right, let's move on to some pre-flight. So information required for a flight. This is for an IFR flight specifically, but you might get asked this anyways. It's going to be NW craft or Northwest craft. I don't like saying Northwest because NW does not stand for Northwest in this instance. So NOTAMs, weather, known traffic delays, runway lengths of intended use, alternates, fuel requirements, and takeoff and landing performance data. For your compass errors, you're going to have north and south turn errors is going to be UNOS, undershoot north, overshoot south, and A is going to be acceleration errors. So ANS, accelerate north, decelerate south. I'm not going to go too much into instrument because I already have a video for instrument. which has been probably my most popular video ever. So, go ahead and go watch that. I have probably all of the compass errors in that video, and I'm sure it is chaptered in the comments or in the description by me. So you can go take a look at that if you want more information on instrument flying itself. If you want a refresher, or if you're trying to get your commercial without your instrument and you want to learn about instruments without getting your rating. All right, so let's briefly go over systems. Now, this is going to be a very brief systems overview. And obviously, like I said, it's going to depend on what airplane you're flying. This is based on your basic GA aircraft. So let's go over systems. So the ignition system, okay? So here are some failures or things that your DPE might bring up, some scenarios. Oh, what happens if this is happening? Oh, this is what could be happening. Okay. So detonation. Detonation means an uncontrolled explosive ignition of the fuel-air mixture within the cylinder's combustion chamber. Generally, this can be caused by a lower fuel grade than recommended and operation of the engine with an extremely high manifold pressure in conjunction with low RPM. Operation of the engine at a high power setting with an excessively lean mixture. This is generally what occurs in a GA aircraft. You're operating the engine at an extremely high power with an excessively lean mixture that can cause detonation, an uncontrolled explosive ignition of the fuel-air mixture within the cylinder's combustion chamber. Pre-ignition occurs when the fuel-air mixture ignites prior to the engine's normal ignition event. This is usually caused by a residual hotspot inside of the combustion chamber. This can cause the engine to lose power and produce high operating temperatures. Sometimes you can hear this, sometimes you can't, so it's important that you keep an eye on your gauges. Spark plug fouling occurs when a low engine operating temperature is coupled with running a rich mixture. So let's talk about fuel-air mixture. The ratio of the weight of the fuel to the weight of the air in the mixture to be burned. I'm going to say that again. Fuel-air mixture means the ratio of the weight of the fuel to the weight of the air in the mixture to be burned. That's what that means. Leaning the fuel mixture at cruise altitude promotes optimal engine performance, and leaning slightly before taxiing prevents spark plugs from fouling, which is why you probably start your engine, lean it out an inch, or you're taxiing, lean it out an inch, or you just got gas in your plane, you turn it on, you crank it, it's on, you lean the mixture just a little bit. Let's go over the magnetos and what they do. So a magneto is an electrical generator that uses permanent magnets to produce periodic pulses of alternating current. They generate an electrical current completely independent of the aircraft's electrical system. I'm going to say it again. It generates an electrical current completely independent of the aircraft's electrical system. It operates whenever the crankshaft is rotating. Remember that even with the ignition switch in the off position, if the ground wire between the magneto and the ignition becomes disconnected or broken, or you decide to crank it when the key is in the both position, the engine could accidentally start if the propeller is moved. So be sure that every time you get out of the plane, the PIC is responsible for turning the key to the off position, and probably best to just remove the key so you don't bump it into the both or left or right position in the ignition. Another point I want to make is your DPE is probably going to ask you several questions about your engine as you're at the commercial pilot level of flying. So you're going to have to know what kind of engine you have, how much horsepower, great. So I'm going to give you an example of what your DPE might want to hear. So I have a Cessna 172N model, 1978 or 79. There's two that I fly, so we'll see which one I get. But he's going to want to hear, okay, I have a Lycoming 0320. It's a horizontally opposed. It's going to be a carbureted engine, and it's going to have 160 or 180 horsepower at 2,600 RPM, and it is a wet sump system, which means that the crankshaft is taking a bath in oil. and the engine is carbureted. I'm not sure if I already said that, but some 172s are actually fuel injected. If you're flying in a newer one, it might be totally different, and you're probably going to have to explain what those terms mean to your DPE. You may also be asked, explain how the pedostatic system works. You're guaranteed to be asked that. You're going to probably get asked, how does the vacuum system work? What are the instruments on the vacuum system? If you want to hear more about systems specifically, you can check out my private pilot video. I definitely have a few sections in there talking about systems as it comes to engine systems specifically. And then my instrument video goes thoroughly over the vacuum system. So you can look at those videos for that. You're going to be asked about systems, specifically about those, the pedostatic, transponder, maybe even the fuel. You might get asked about the ELT. You might get asked about all these different things. So make sure you're definitely brushed up on your specific airplane and how all these things come together. I personally, for my Checkride, just went ahead and printed out all of the systems of the POH and put it in my Checkride binder. That's something you can do. Totally up to you. I'm going to go over a fixed pitch and a constant speed propeller in case your aircraft does have this. And you might need to understand this on your Checkride, obviously, because we're at a commercial level. So fixed pitch is when the blade angle is built into the blade itself. So once the propeller has been built, the angle can't really be changed. So think a Cessna iFly is a 172 1978 model. It's got a fixed pitch. A constant speed propeller, this is going to be your Bonanzas, this is going to be your Debonairs, this is going to be your Saratogas, is going to be a controllable pitch propeller, which pitch is automatically varied in flight by a governor. And there's going to be two controls. So the throttle and the propeller control. So it's going to be a blue lever. The blue lever is generally going to control the pitch of the propeller. And once the RPM is selected, a governor automatically can adjust the propeller blade. Although sometimes it is adjustable. It just depends on what kind of airplane you're flying. I'm going to briefly go over the types of altitudes. So the two most confusing altitudes, in my opinion, that I'm just going to briefly go over so I can listen to this and remember it. Pressure altitude is altitude corrected for non-standard pressure, and density altitude is pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. Let's briefly go over the supplemental oxygen requirements. This definitely tripped me up when my CFI asked me this for the first time ever since private pilot, so I am going to go over these briefly. So 91-11 is where you can find this. I'd highlight this in your ACS unless you can totally remember this, and good for you. I do not have a perfect brain, and I'm going to study this and I'll try my best to remember it, but you can always highlight it. So between sea level and 12,500 feet MSL, you do not need any supplemental oxygen. Remember, this is MSL. So sea level to 12,500 feet MSL, you do not need any supplemental oxygen. From 12,501 MSL to 14,000 feet MSL, you are required to have supplemental oxygen if over 30 minutes at this altitude, if you're part of the crew. So if you're flying the airplane, you're part of the crew, you require supplemental oxygen if you're here for over 30 minutes. Now, if we go above 14,000 feet at 14,000 feet and 1 MSL, it is required to be used by the flight crew, and then above 15,001 to 25,000 feet for every occupant and the flight crew as well. Now, in my Cessna 172, I can't fly anywhere near above 25,000 feet, so I'm not really going to cover that, and I'm sure you probably won't be asked that. Let's go over some aerodynamic basics. So let's talk about what can affect aerodynamics. So the type of icing. So you got rime ice, clear ice, and mixed ice. So rime ice is going to be a rough, milky, opaque ice. It is formed by the instantaneous or very rapid freezing of supercooled droplets as they strike the leading edges. And rough surface can decrease aerodynamic efficiency, but is lighter than clear ice. Clear ice is going to be a glossy, transparent ice formed by the slow freezing of supercooled water. It generally tends to be denser, harder, and sometimes more transparent than rime ice. It also can be harder to remove than rime ice. Mixed ice is just going to be a combination of these two. And depending on how rough or how little this ice is, it can have a significant effect on aerodynamics. And the types of icing intensities are going to be trace, light, moderate, and severe. So trace is going to be perceptible, but not hazardous unless you're there for an extended period of time. Light is when the icing is clearly visible, and you should probably activate some sort of anti-icing or de-icing to prevent accumulation. Moderate is short encounters can be definitely hazardous. You should definitely use anti-icing or de-icing equipment to use or divert. And then severe is severe. You obviously know what that is, or at least I hope you do. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's severe. A diversion must be made. So let's go over the four forces of flight. So you have lift, thrust, gravity, and drag. So let's talk about the two types of drag. So parasitic drag is drag produced by the motion of an object through a fluid. Again, parasitic drag is drag produced by the motion of an object through a fluid. And induced drag is drag that arises from the development of lift. The two forces in a turn is going to be horizontal lift and centrifugal force. Let's touch on the good old Bernoulli's principle. Basic principle that allows for the creation of lift is the Bernoulli principle. It states that an increase in the speed of a fluid occurs simultaneously with a decrease in pressure or a decrease in the fluid's potential energy. As air passes above the wing, it speeds up and creates an area of low pressure. As the air passes below the wing, it slows down and creates increased pressure. The pressure difference creates an upward lifting force. So remember that the area above the wing is low pressure and the area below the wing is high pressure. Let's briefly go over stalls, as some of the commercial maneuvers pretty much bring you to stall speed. And stalls are definitely something you need to be on top of when it comes to your commercial check ride. So the definition of a stall is a rapid decrease in lift caused by the separation of airflow from the wing surface brought on by exceeding the critical angle of attack. And this can occur at any pitch attitude or airspeed. So stalls in different flight situations, generally there's going to be three. So you have your low speed, your high speed, and your turning. So your low speed stalls means as airspeed decreases, the angle of attack must be increased to retain the lift required for maintaining altitude, or eventually an angle of attack will be reached, which results in the wing not producing enough lift to support the aircraft and it will stall. A high-speed stall is when the critical angle of attack can be reached at practically obviously any speed, but with an abrupt change to the angle of attack at a high speed, the critical angle of attack can be exceeded and a stall can become imminent. A turning stall is when the centrifugal force is added to the aircraft's weight and the wing must produce sufficient additional lift to counterbalance the load imposed by the combination of centrifugal force and weight. And since the angle of attack must be increased as the bank increases, careful consideration must be made not to exceed the critical angle of attack, because a turn plus a stall can result in a spin if you are uncoordinated. We're not going to get too far into spins, but we are going to touch on it. So the four phases of a spin are going to be the entry phase, the incipient phase, the develop phase, and the recovery phase. You're going to want to recover using the pair acronym. So power idle, ailerons neutral, rudder opposite, and elevator briskly forward so that you can regain lift on your wings. All right, so let's talk about the left-hand turning tendencies now that we're on here. This is turning into a slight CFI kind of course here, but it doesn't matter because I want to go over the left-hand turning tendencies. You need to know these. So the left-hand turning tendencies are caused due to the aerodynamic principles, also known as yaw, and it causes the aircraft to drift left. So we need to be aware of the rudder here. So there are four left-hand turning tendencies of the aircraft, which is going to be torque, slipstream, gyroscopic precession, and P factor. So let's go through these. Now I have to give credit to Angle of Attack. He's a YouTuber for providing this information. So again, I'm going to credit Angle of Attack for this. You could check out his website, angleofattack.com. Not affiliated with them by any means, just reading their useful information that I thought is very valuable to everybody. So torque, slipstream, gyroscopic precession, and P factor are the 4 left-hand turning tendencies. So torque. Of the 4 turning tendencies, torque is the easiest to understand and counter. For that, let's recall Newton's third law. The third law of Isaac Newton states that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you pull a string outwards, when you do that, the equal amount of force is generated that restores the string to its original form. So the same phenomenon is observed in airplanes. The propeller in most single-engine airplane rotates clockwise. This clockwise movement generates an equal force in the opposite direction. That causes the aircraft to move left during flight, and on the ground, the left-hand turning tendency generated by torque increases friction from the left side of the landing gear. It also causes the plane to yaw left. To counter torque, pilots need to use the right aileron input. For this, you can remember, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction created. Spiraling slipstream is how the air spirals around the airplane behind the propeller. In a corkscrew pattern, this will impact the vertical stabilizer or the rudder on the left, thus creating yaw to the left. I'm sure this is probably the easiest one to remember, but also to counter this, you definitely need to be on the rudders when you're taking off. Otherwise, the plane can totally veer off track, and right rudder is probably going to be the best thing for you, especially when you're adding power. The most confusing one, in my opinion, to learn was gyroscopic precession. Gyroscopic precession means when all rotating objects, even the Earth, experience a change in the orientation of their rotational axis is called precession. An aircraft's propeller is no exception, and if you take a gyroscope and spin it, you'll notice it has 2 properties similar to an aircraft propeller, which is rigidity in space and precession. Now let's understand how precession affects a propeller. When you apply a force to a rotating object, that effect is felt at 90 degrees in the direction of rotation. In other words, when a force is applied at a 12 o'clock position, the plane will feel the force at a 3 o'clock position. This is provided the propeller is rotating clockwise, which will cause the aircraft to turn left. Gyroscopic precession is generally only significant during takeoff. When the aircraft tail rises, the force is generated and is felt at the top of the propeller. To counter this effect, you are instructed to anticipate left movement and increase the right rudder input. Gyroscopic precession also occurs during flight, and the aircraft may yaw in the air, and you must counter it as well. P factor is going to be known as an asymmetric propeller loading. It occurs when thrust is produced by the propeller, and it is not constant. This results in the aircraft turning in a particular direction, but not necessarily left. In the case of a prop-driven aircraft, P factor occurs when the blade descends. So when the plane propeller turns clockwise, this means that the blade always descends on the right and ascends on the left. The descending blade causes more lift, hence the total lift doesn't get centered on the propeller arc. Because of this, the lift is offset to the right and the aircraft yaws to the left. Because when the blade descends on the right, the blade on the right, which is the descending one, creates more lift, which will cause a left-hand turning tendency, which is why generally it will be more prevalent at a higher angle of attack. So flight and takeoffs are prime examples of it, and to counter this, you must use right rudder. All right, so that goes over most aerodynamics right there. You're probably going to get asked about aerodynamics. I was definitely iffy on aerodynamics for some time, but I wanted to make this video and also hear myself talk about it so that way I can listen to it. Again, this is my study guide, and this is for entertainment purposes only. I'm not a CFI. Remember, I'm just a wahoo on YouTube who is providing fun content, and none of this is to be taken literally. It's all a joke. We're going to briefly touch on thunderstorms here, as I feel like we've probably touched on everything else. So what are the 4 phases of a thunderstorm? It's going to be your cumulus, mature, dissipating. So those are they're going to be the 3 phases. So the cumulus is when the warmer air in the environment will start to rise. It'll cause updrafts. And then the mature is going to be the downdrafts, which will cause evaporative cooling, and the dissipating is when the downdrafts are prominent. So you're going to see a bunch of rain and the anvil top will start to weaken. The towering cumulus will turn into non-threatening clouds, and you'll experience downdrafts of cool air. The important phases of thunderstorms, or the important parts of a thunderstorm you want to be mindful of, are two that you're probably going to be asked about. Oh, what are the most dangerous ones? It's going to be your microburst and your wind shears. So microburst is a localized column of sinking air or downdraft within a thunderstorm and is usually less than or equal to 2.5 miles in diameter, where winds can reach speeds of 100 miles per hour or higher. And you should avoid this at all costs because you should go on YouTube and actually look up microburst after this video. Microburst video. There's this video of a microburst on a mountain. It's a really crazy video, but that's a perfect example of why you don't want to fly in it. And then wind shear is a change in wind speed over a short distance, and it can cause a headwind to a tailwind to a tailwind to a headwind to a tailwind, which can quickly alter your flight path and is definitely most dangerous at low levels. If you're coming into land, if you're taking off, you need to be very mindful. One thing we did not touch on was the National Airspace System. So let's go over the cloud clearance requirements. So Class A doesn't matter. There's no cloud clearance requirements. You need to be on an IFR flight plan. For Class Bravo airspace, you need to have 3 statute miles of visibility and be clear of clouds. For Class C and D airspace, you need to be 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, 2,000 feet horizontal. So for Class C and D, CD, 3 152s. For Class E airspace at less than 10,000 feet MSL, you need to have 3 statute miles visibility, 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally. And at or above 10,000 feet MSL, you need to have 5 statute miles of visibility and 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and 1 statute mile horizontally. For Class E, at or above 10,000, you can remember 5, 111. And for Class G airspace, this one is the one that trips people up. So up to 1,200 feet AGL during the day, 1 statute miles clear of clouds. Class G, up to 1,200 feet AGL at night is 3 statute miles, 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally. And then more than 1,200 feet AGL, but less than 10,000 feet MSL, during the day will be 1 statute mile, 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally. And then at night, it will be 3 statute miles, 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally. And then if you are more than 1,200 feet AGL and at or above 10,000 feet MSL, you're going to need the F111, 5 statute miles, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and 1 statute mile. For this, I believe this is going to be in the FAR-AIM. It's going to be part 71, I believe. Let's briefly touch on some aeromedical factors. You might get asked this since, of course, you might be carrying passengers when you're a commercial pilot, or hopefully you are. That way you're able to detect what's going on with your passengers. So let's go with hypoxia first. So hypoxia is a condition of the body in which the tissues are starved of oxygen. Hypoxic hypoxia occurs when insufficient oxygen is available to the body as a whole. Hypemic occurs when the body is unable to take up and transport a sufficient amount of oxygen to the cells in the body. Stagnant results when the oxygen-rich blood in the lungs are not moving for one reason or another. Blood is not moving, so oxygen is not delivered to the tissues. So think you ate a big Thanksgiving meal. That's going to be stagnant hypoxia. And histotoxic is going to be the inability of the cells to effectively use oxygen due to a toxic substance, so due to drugs or something like alcohol. Next, we can talk about hyperventilation. Hyperventilation is the excessive rate and depth of respiration leading to an abnormal loss of carbon dioxide from the blood. And symptoms of hyperventilation are similar to those of hypoxia. It's important to clarify correctly and diagnose and treat the proper condition, but when in doubt, treat it as hypoxia and get to a lower altitude. The best solution for hyperventilation is to slow your breathing and increase your carbon dioxide intake by breathing into some kind of bag. When you excessively breathe too much oxygen, you lack carbon dioxide. So if you have a bag handy, breathe into the bag and you can increase your carbon dioxide. Now, carbon monoxide poisoning is exposure to a colorless, odorless, tasteless, deadly gas caused by the combustion of carbon-based materials, usually airplane gas getting into the cabin, and symptoms usually will start with drowsiness and come on quickly. The best solution is to turn the cabin heat off, open your windows, ventilate the cabin, and land as soon as possible. All right, so I did not go over some specific things. More private pilot level things are going to be in my private pilot video. For example, I didn't go over medicals and I didn't go over that much weather. You're going to see more weather during your instrument, which I did cover in those videos. So I don't have to repeat myself. I already use those videos to study anyways. I would just go and look at those videos and just watch all of them, and you'll be totally brushed up on everything. I literally cover over 3 hours of content on all of my Checkride prep, commercial instrument, private pilot, study, ACS review videos. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys again for over 1,000 subscribers. I mean, my channel is absolutely blown up. Again, thank you so much. If you do like this content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. I do have more videos coming. They are a surprise, obviously, but they are important videos that could save you a lot of time and money. Again, my goal on YouTube is to, in an entertaining way, provide as much valuable as possible to you on YouTube. And I love watching YouTube videos. I love learning, and I love spreading entertainment content. So please like and subscribe if you do like this video, or if you were able to derive any value from this video, and leave a comment while you're at it. If I missed something or if I said something improperly, I do love constructive criticism, and I will respond to most of all my comments unless you're a troll. Thank you so much for watching. Again, have a great day and good luck on your private pilot, instrument pilot, commercial pilot, ATP pilot, whatever kind of pilot you want to be, helicopter pilot, gyroplane pilot, career, or hobby. Have a great day, guys. All right, so for those of you who have stuck around to this second part of the video, we're going to be going through a actual practical application to all of this information that I just went through, because that's what the actual Checkride is all about. So we're going to treat this as if I'm a DPE and I'm just asking the questions, and then I'm answering the questions. And then if you stick around for a bonus at the end, I'm going to give you questions that maybe you can look into and study on your own if that's something that potentially interests you. All right, so we'll start with pre-flight preparation. So show me in the FAR-AIM where the training requirements for the commercial pilot certifications are listed. So the 61-120s, specifically 61-123 is going to be your eligibility. Your 61-125 is going to be your aeronautical knowledge. 61-127 is going to be flight proficiency, and your 61-129 is going to be your aeronautical experience, like your flight time requirements. I'm going to go ahead and leave a annotated ACS that I actually went through myself and annotated for free in the comment section down below, as well as a link to a ton of study guides, just like the ones that I am going to be walking you guys through. Okay, so let's say, hypothetically speaking, today you pass your commercial Checkride and you stop flying for 5 years, and you happen to stumble upon a job listing online for a pilot position for where, in exchange for a salary, you would be on call each week to fly the owner of a 230 horsepower Cessna 182 to various destinations around the country, both day and night. You would essentially be an employee, and most of the flying would be single pilot IFR. As a commercial pilot, are you eligible to apply for this position? In this case, the answer would be yes, because this is considered Part 91 flying. It's a typical corporate pilot job, but you cannot start flying and acting as PIC until you're current and properly endorsed. So what would you need to do to start flying? Can you start flying immediately? No. What you would have to do before you start flying in this position is get current and be properly endorsed. So you need to accomplish a flight review, an IPC, because you're going to be flying instrument. And if you're carrying passengers, you need to make sure that you are abiding by the 3 takeoffs and landings, and those landings must be to a full stop
if carrying passengers at night or in a tailwheel. And you also need to make sure you have an appropriate medical certificate, like a second class or a first class, as well as your high performance or complex endorsement if required. In this case, you would only need your high performance because the 182 is not retractable gear. Do you have to log these currency flights, or is it enough that you've completed them? No, these must be logged. And are you required to log any other type of flight time? In this case, yes, because you would need it to qualify for currency and or a Checkride. So would you be able to accept the job if you didn't have an instrument rating? In this case, no, because without an instrument rating, you can only fly passengers during the day within 50 nautical miles, and this job requires flying passengers farther than 50 nautical miles in IFR conditions and also at night. Let's switch up the story and say that you actually own this Cessna 182 and you go on Facebook and you post that you'd be willing to fly your friends to certain destinations for money. Is this legal? No, that is considered holding out, and you would make the operation common carriage. So what do you mean by holding out? Well, in this case, you are advertising. Specifically, holding out means extending a willingness to transport persons or property from place to place for compensation. It's the defining feature of common carriage. So what is common carriage? Flying for hire that involves holding out. So what's private carriage for hire? Flying for hire that does not involve holding out, aka advertising yourself. So why is an airline and charter operators able to do this, but you can't? Well, they have commercial operator certificates, like 121 or 135 certificates, as well as business licenses that allow them to do so. You, as a Part 91 operator, are restricted. So what are you restricted to? Well, some things you're limited to and are able to do are flight instruction, air tours, you're able to ferry, you're able to do aerial work like crop dusting, seeding, spraying, bird chasing, banner towing, aerial photography, firefighting, and parachute jumping. Those are just some examples. So when is a Part 125 certificate required? Well, a 125 certificate is required when the airplane's max payload exceeds 6,000 pounds or has a passenger seating capacity of 20 seats or more. So you mentioned that in order to carry passengers at night, 3 night landings are required. So when exactly do these landings have to occur? The period from 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. So is that in order to carry passengers during what time frame? It's going to be the same time frame, 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. So can these landings be stop and goes, or do they have to be full stop taxi backs? In this case, stop and goes are permitted. So how often must you complete a flight review? You must complete a flight review every 24 calendar months. And if your DPE asks you, okay, so 24 calendar months from what? It has to be from the last flight review or your last check ride. Those are some short and brief examples of some things that you might be asked, situational questions. I'm also going to be going over a actual real life check ride that my friend went through and told me all of the questions that the DPE asked him for his commercial single engine check ride. That way we can go over them and I can ask the questions and you can go ahead and start finding information about your specific airplane or about the specific information that was asked to my friend. Again, this is current, but this is going to vary obviously from DPE to DPE. It's just along the lines of what the questions were asked, and you can either listen to them and do something or just listen to it or not listen to it, whatever you'd like. But before we get into that, let's just go over the commercial pilot privileges again. Woohoo, I know you're excited. Okay, so what can you do with your new commercial certificate? You're able to fly for hire. FAR 119.1 examples are give instruction, sightseeing, banner towing, pipeline, power line control, parachute jumping, as long as you're not carrying passengers predictably and or on a schedule. So that leads me to what you cannot do. You cannot fly in a manner that mimics operations requiring either an air carrier or an air carry taxi operating certificate. You can also find this in 119.5. All right, so what is the difference between common and private carriage? Common means solicited and or available to all versus private carriage means unsolicited and available only to a few. What does holding out mean? Holding out means when you advertise yourself as a commercial pilot. All right, so that's enough of repetition. Let's get into the actual check ride questions that my friends were asked on the actual check ride itself by the DPE on the ground portion. If you want to carry your friend, what type of flight experience do you need to meet? Is there any medical certificates that I need to fly the airplane? What type of inspections will the aircraft need? How long is the registration or the airworthiness certificate good for? If we want to go fly today and we don't have a functional turn coordinator, are we able to make this flight? How do we get electricity in our airplane? What is the whirling sound you hear when you turn on the master switch? Show me how you pre-flight. How did you obtain weather for today? Explain to me what all of these charts mean, referring to the service analysis charts, all of the for-flight briefing charts. Let's say you're flying today and you lose your comms. What do? Okay, you want to use lost comms. What kind of light gun signal would you expect? What is the CG, and why is that relevant to our flight today? What is the arm and the datum line? And explain the effect of an aft CG or a forward CG. What are all of the 3 most dangerous weather conditions that exist? Why is icing dangerous, and how does it happen? What are supercooled water droplets, and why are they important to us? These are all questions that you can expect to be asked on your commercial check ride. Again, it's going to vary from DP to DPE, and it's very important that you stay studying and that you're ready for anything that the DPE might throw at you, like a curveball and whatnot. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Again, this is for my personal use and for entertainment purposes only, and this is for my studying, and I just want to put it on YouTube so that others can do the same if you're interested. And thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate all the support. I hope that this video was valuable to you in one way or another. It took some time to talk into the microphone for this long and all the hiccups and bloopers and everything. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. If you did like the content, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great day.